Here's a story that still gives me goosebumps every time I tell it. A love story so powerful, so unlikely, it could only take root in the wide-open, unforgiving West, where golden light spills over blood-red rock and the wind sings songs of freedom and loss. This is the country where lives intersect like crossed trails, where a woman raised in silk and steel met a man forged in fire and silence. It all began with a single sentence she was never supposed to say out loud, a sentence that broke the chains she'd worn since childhood. That one quiet act of courage was enough to change the course of 2 hearts, and maybe the whole damn frontier. You won't forget this one. Before we get started, if it's hitting you already, give that like button some love, and drop a comment. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Sable Quinn had always understood that her life wasn't truly hers to live. As the only daughter of Thane Corrick, a powerful railroad investor tied to men like Gage Varn, one of the richest names on the frontier, expectations had been piled on her long before she was old enough to carry them. Deep down, though, she still clung to a quiet hope that someday, somewhere, she'd get to choose at least one thing for herself. That fragile hope shattered the night her father stood at the head of the grandest dining table he'd ever set. Lanterns cast golden light across polished wood. Crystal glasses caught every flicker like frozen stars. Rich men clapped each other on the back, laughing as though they'd personally invented money. Sable sat beside her father in a gown picked for show. Not comfort, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Colonel Draven Locke, tall, immaculate in his starched blue uniform, lifted his glass with a victorious smirk. "To the future, Mrs. Locke," he declared. The room exploded in cheers and clinking glasses. Sable's stomach dropped like a stone into deep water. She hadn't been told. Not a single word from her father. The colonel had never once asked what she wanted, let alone her hand. The whole thing had been sealed behind closed doors, handshakes traded for promises of army protection and bigger rail contracts. In that moment, with the ache carving itself into her chest, she understood she wasn't being wed for love. She was being bartered. After the toast, the colonel stepped close, smiling like he'd won a prize. "You'll find life as my wife more comfortable than anything you've ever known," he said smoothly, as though comfort was the only thing a woman could want. His hand hovered near hers, staking a claim without quite touching. Everything about him was stiff. His back, his tone, his unshakable belief that she would fall in line without question. Sable dipped her head politely. Inside, she screamed. Later that night, she stood alone on the wide balcony, staring out at the black sea of plains. Stars burned wild and endless overhead. How cruel, she thought, that the sky could wander free while her future had already been laid down like iron rails, straight, unyielding, inescapable. The days blurred after that. Trunks were packed. A wedding gown was ordered. Her father pressed a proud kiss to her forehead, blind to the emptiness behind her eyes. She would travel to Fort Ironwood under military escort, a grand show of her new importance. Sable kept silent. She buried her dread the way she'd hide letters she could never send. On departure morning, she climbed into the waiting wagon. Soldiers swung into saddles, carbines gleaming. Lieutenant Slade gave her a curt, practiced nod, but his eyes betrayed the same unease she felt. The colonel would be waiting at the fort, eager to parade his bride before every officer under his command. As the wheels began to turn, Sable stole one last glance at the land falling away behind her. Home, freedom, everything slipping through her fingers. She whispered to the wind, "I wish my life belonged to me." But wishes were thin and brittle out here on the edge of the world. What Sable didn't know, what nobody knew, was that fate was already waking in the canyon's red dust. Eyes tracked them from the high cliffs. The fiercest Apache warrior waited in the shadows, ready to rewrite her entire future. The road to Colonel Locke would never reach its end, and the woman who believed she had no choice was about to meet the one man who would hand her back her freedom by taking her away. The canyon was a maze of shifting shadows and hollow echoes, where every noise bounced twice and every shape looked like trouble. The soldiers escorting Sable rode tight, horses uneasy. Lieutenant Slade tried to sound calm, but his voice was too tight. "How much farther?" Sable asked, pretending her words didn't shake. "Hour, maybe 2, he answered. "We'll clear the pass before noon." Noon never came. A hawk screamed overhead, cutting the silence like a blade. Soldiers traded quick, nervous looks. One man's hand dropped to his rifle. Then the canyon exploded. A bone-rattling war cry ripped from the cliffs above. Horses reared. Men shouted. Sable's heart slammed against her ribs. Arrows hissed down in black arcs, smacking stone and burying into dirt. The wagon lurched hard as Flint ducked low. "Ambush!" "Take cover!" Lieutenant Slade bellowed. Sable froze, pinned by the sudden storm. Hooves thundered against the canyon walls. A wave of Apache warriors poured down, bare-chested, faces streaked with paint, riding as if they were part of the wind itself. Swift, deadly, alive. At their head rode one man, taller, faster, commanding without a word. Long black hair whipped behind him like a battle flag. Corded muscle flexed along his arms as he drew and loosed arrow after arrow with lethal grace. His name was Riven. Though Sable didn't know it yet, the canyon already carried it on the wind. Riven drew his bowstring taut and sent arrow after arrow flying with lethal precision. Each shot found its mark without hesitation. Sable didn't know his name yet. The canyon seemed to breathe it already. A soldier broke from the chaos and lunged toward her, reaching to haul her from the wagon to cover. But the wagon lurched violently as Flint took an arrow and crumpled. Sable tumbled out, hitting the ground hard. Red dust boiled up around her, thick and suffocating. A shadow swallowed the light above. She lifted her eyes and locked gazes with the fiercest Apache warrior she'd ever seen. His eyes were deep black, forged by a lifetime of survival, unblinking and steady even as battle raged. He wasn't winded, not even close. His face gave nothing away, yet something in that calm gaze made her terror stumble, hesitate. He leaned low from his horse and barked a sharp command in Apache. 2 warriors sprang forward, shoving the wrecked wagon aside before it could crush her. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to see her at all. But he did. A rifle cracked. Soldier fire aimed straight at him. In a heartbeat, Riven vaulted from his mount, seized Sable, and dragged her behind a massive boulder. His body became a shield, solid and warm against her back. "Don't hurt me," she whispered, voice shaking apart. He glanced down, not with malice, but something closer to quiet curiosity. "You stay," he said in rough, accented English, low as distant thunder. "Not hurt." Before she could answer, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing and set her across his horse's back. His grip was strong yet careful, deliberate, like he refused to let anything break her. "Why are you taking me?" she gasped. His jaw clenched. For a split second, old pain flickered through his eyes. "Your people take," he said, swinging up behind her. "Today, we take back." He clucked softly. The horse surged forward. The canyon walls blurred into streaks of red. Gunshots faded into echoes. The soldiers vanished behind swirling dust. Sable gripped the coarse mane, heart hammering, not only from fear, but from a strange new truth taking root inside her. The man who'd stolen her wasn't a savage, and the life she'd been chained to was crumbling with every powerful stride. The Apache camp nestled deep among saw-toothed cliffs, bathed in late afternoon sun and long purple shadows. Small fires glowed, thin smoke drifting skyward into the vast blue. Sable had never seen anything like it. Teepees stood in neat circles. Warriors moved with calm purpose. Children darted barefoot across the red earth, laughing without fear. The whole place breathed, alive, peaceful, disciplined, yet untamed. Her pulse pounded painfully. She'd grown up hearing the Apache were cruel, wild, merciless. What she saw now shook her deeper. They weren't monsters. They were people. And at the heart of it stood the man who'd taken her. Riven swung down first, his horse stepping sure-footed over uneven ground. Sable slid off reluctantly, steadied by his firm hand at her elbow. Even after the brutal ride, she felt something unexpected in his touch. Not threat, not ownership, just steady care that somehow eased the loneliness clawing at her chest. He guided her to a small teepee on the camp's edge. Smoke curled lazily from the opening. Inside, blankets lay folded with precision, the dirt floor swept smooth. Simple. Clean. The first place that felt safe since the ambush. "You rest," Riven said, voice low and quiet. Not an order. A shield. She nodded, throat too tight for words. He didn't leave right away. He stood at the entrance, dark eyes sweeping the camp, watchful. From the shadows, Sable studied him. His frame was broader and stronger than any man she'd known. Every motion exact, controlled, yet he held something back, a deep restraint that spoke of iron discipline. After a long silence, he spoke again. "You hungry?" The question caught her off guard. Not because it was odd, but because it was so ordinary, so human. She hesitated, then nodded. Riven stepped out and returned moments later with a wooden bowl of roasted venison and a piece of warm cornbread. He offered it gently. She realized her hands were shaking. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear twisting together into something raw. As she ate, she felt his gaze, not possessive, but intense enough to make her heartbeat skip. Every move he made, righting a dropped lance, tending the fire, carried quiet power and certainty. Yet beneath it lay something softer, a thoughtful strength. This was a man who could break armies, but chose gentleness with her. "Why?" she asked softly, the question slipping out. "Why don't you hurt me?" Riven paused, weighing her words. Then he answered simply, "Not yours to fear me." The words came out rough and broken in English, but their meaning cut straight through. Riven didn't look at her like a foe or a trophy. To him, she was simply a person. Separate, real, human. That simple truth left Sable strangely relieved and deeply shaken at the same time. Relief, because no blade hovered at her throat. Unsettled, because no man had ever seen her that way before. That night she lay on the neatly folded blankets, ears tuned to the camp's gentle heartbeat. Fires snapped softly. Voices drifted low in the distance. Somewhere a single drum pulsed slow and steady, yet her mind refused to quiet. All she could see was him, the quiet warrior whose powerful hands had held her with iron strength and surprising gentleness, whose dark eyes seemed to glimpse pieces of her soul she'd never shown anyone. Sleep came in fits and starts, restless and shallow. When it finally took her, it was beneath the silent guard of the strongest Apache she'd ever encountered. Deep inside her chest, something flickered to life, a feeling she couldn't name, dangerous and electric, impossible yet impossible to ignore. Curiosity about the man. Curiosity about this wild world she'd never been allowed to touch. And maybe, just maybe, the tiniest spark of wanting to see what he'd do next. Miles away at Fort Ironwood, Colonel Draven Locke stalked across the wide plank floor of his office, a thunderhead brewing behind his cold blue stare. The message had come in on a riderless horse, a folded scrap of paper stabbed to the saddle. Short, taunting. She is with us now. She is safe. But she is ours. Riven. Locke crushed the note in his fist until his knuckles whitened. Safe? He snarled. That Apache dares call this safe? His officers shifted uncomfortably. They'd never seen him this furious. Locke had forged his name on absolute control, bending men, everything to his will. Nothing had ever stood against him. Not blizzards, not enemy commanders, not uprisings, but one Apache warrior hidden in canyon shadows had taken what he considered rightfully his. Get every man saddled, he barked. We ride at first light. We take back what belongs to me. That girl is mine. I will not be made a fool by mountain savages. A lean lieutenant with sharp eyes cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, the canyon's a death trap. They know every inch. Locke's fist slammed the desk so hard the inkwell jumped. Then we ride into it. She comes back to me. I won't have my honor dragged through the dirt by any of them. Not Riven, not his warriors, not a single one. The room went dead quiet, except for the colonel's harsh breathing. His officers traded uneasy looks. Everyone understood this had stopped being about a woman. It was about power, pride, dominance. Locke's rage threatened to drag the entire fort, its soldiers and Sable Quinn, into a war no one had asked for. Meanwhile, Sable sat alone in the teepee, thoughts coiling like a rattler in hot sand. Riven had gone to speak with the council, leaving her surrounded by the camp's living sounds. Children's laughter, fires popping, wind whispering through the canyon walls. She'd braced for fear to swallow her whole. Instead, something else pressed hard against her ribs. Worry. Not for herself. For him. She remembered how he'd thrown his body between her and bullets in the ambush. How he'd guided her through the madness with steady hands. How he'd spoken to her with patience and quiet care she'd never known from any man. The idea of him cut down by Locke's soldiers, of the colonel ordering the village burned to ash, twisted her stomach into knots. Could she stop it? Could she beg for mercy? Could she even live through a war like that? And deeper, a thought that terrified her most. What if she didn't want to be rescued by anyone else? At first light, the sound of approaching riders rolled through the canyon like distant thunder. Cavalry in blue, led by Colonel Locke himself, took up positions along the ridges. Metal glinted cold against the red rock. Dust boiled thick on the wind. Somewhere a bugle cut the morning tension sharp. Riven stepped back into the teepee. His face stayed calm, but his eyes carried a storm warning. They come, he said simply. Sable nodded, heart slamming against her ribs. In that instant, she understood. Her choice, or her refusal to choose, was about to light a fuse far bigger than her own life. The man who'd started as a stranger, who'd become her shield, would soon face one of the most powerful men she'd ever known, and she would stand with him. Not as a captive, not as a prize, but as someone finally beginning to taste what real freedom felt like. The Apache camp thrummed with quiet purpose. Beneath the everyday rhythm, a low tension vibrated like a taut bowstring. Warriors honed blades and checked bowstrings. Scouts ghosted along the cliff rims. Elders spoke in hushed tones. From the teepee entrance, Sable watched it all, pulse racing with equal parts dread and strange fascination. Sable had braced herself for captivity to choke the life out of her. Instead, in this rough world of red dust and flickering firelight, she felt a pulse she'd never known back east. Not under her father's roof, not in the shadow of Colonel Locke. Here, strangely, she felt more awake, more present than she ever had. Riven returned from the council fire. Worry had carved fresh lines around his eyes, sharpening the strong planes of his face. He walked with the same measured control she'd come to recognize, yet she caught the faint tightness across his broad shoulders. His people were fierce and ready, but Colonel Draven Locke was a different kind of storm, one that rolled in with cannons and orders and no mercy. "You cannot go back," Sable said abruptly, shattering the thick quiet as she lifted her gaze to meet his. Her voice shook, but the words stood firm. "If you send me to him, I won't go easy. I refuse to be owned. I belong somewhere else. With you, or nowhere at all." For a heartbeat, Riven's eyes darkened, his mouth tightening into a thin line. He stayed silent, listening the way he always did, like every word she spoke carried real weight and deserved to be measured. The canyon wind sighed past, stirring dust across the ground. Sable thought she could almost hear his heart, steady, powerful, completely human, thudding beneath that warrior's calm. "You talk about choice," he said at last, his English rough but deliberate. "In your world, men take, women are told. That is their life, not yours." "Yes," she admitted, voice soft but sure. "I've been told what to do my whole life, but I can't keep living like that, not if it means I'm just a prize, just property." He studied her in silence. Firelight danced in his dark eyes, reflecting something deep and unreadable. Then, after what felt like forever, he stepped closer. Each movement carried strength, yet every inch of the distance he closed held care. He stopped just short of touching her, letting the space between them hum with its own heavy meaning. "You stay here," he said, voice dropping low, almost a murmur. "Not theirs to send. Not theirs to take. I promise." Sable's chest squeezed tight. That promise wasn't only about keeping her safe. It was respect. Plain, fierce recognition that she was human, not a piece on someone else's board. No one had ever looked at her that way. The air crackled between them. Not desire, not yet, but something sharper, more perilous. Trust. For the first time, she felt real hope rising. Not hope of returning to the cage she'd been promised, but hope for a life she could actually claim. A life where fear gave way to courage, where blind obedience gave way to her own decisions. And woven through that hope came a strange, heady warmth, an attraction she wasn't ready to name. Riven turned his head slightly, glancing toward the high cliffs where scouts glided like shadows, eyes on the horizon for any sign of Locke's men. "They come," he said quietly. "But you safe. I keep my word." Sable swallowed hard, throat thick. She ached to spill everything, her fear, her gratitude, the new, fluttering thing blooming inside her. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, understanding that his promise was bigger than protection. It was an invitation to trust, to let someone finally see her, truly see her. Since the day her betrothal was announced, defiance had been stirring inside her. Not wild or foolish, but solid and sure. She would not be forced into a life she rejected. She would not be a pawn in a man's war or her father's schemes. And if she had any courage left at all, she would stand beside Riven, the silent warrior whose strength was rivaled only by the quiet depth of his heart. As the sun sank behind the canyon rim, the camp eased into evening hush. Sable watched Riven move among his people, commanding, disciplined, yet gentle in ways she hadn't expected. In a world built on rules she'd never chosen, she had found her first true ally. And perhaps, though she wasn't ready to admit it even to herself, the first man who could ever truly claim her heart. Days slipped by in a rhythm foreign to Sable, yet oddly comforting. The Apache camp flowed like a living thing, every person adding to the strength of the whole. Children chased each other near the fires. Elders shared stories of the land. Warriors sharpened arrows and tested bowstrings with practiced hands. Through it all, Riven moved like a quiet storm, powerful, in command, yet always careful. And Sable found herself watching him far more than she would ever confess. The morning after Colonel Locke's ultimatum arrived, Riven came to her with steady purpose. "Come," he said, nodding toward the canyon's edge. "Learn." Sable hesitated, uncertain what he intended, but she followed, and soon realized he was opening his world to her, showing her how to see it through his eyes. He taught her to read the ground, the faint prints of deer, the warning signs of coming rain, the art of stepping silent over broken rock. His strong hands guided hers as they traced leaves and stones. His voice stayed low and patient, explaining things she'd never dreamed of knowing. "Like this," he said, adjusting her fingers on the bowstring. "Don't fight with muscle only. Use your mind. Use your senses. Find balance." She glanced up at him, cheeks hot with effort and a touch of shyness. "I don't know if I can," she started. Riven's eyes softened, but pity had no place there. "You can," he said firmly. "You must." The raw intensity in his gaze unsettled her, not with fear, but with something deeper, more tangled. Every look he gave her, every quiet word, every careful motion pulled at her in ways she couldn't explain. Yet he never crowded her, never pushed. Still, the nearness of him, the solid warmth rolling off his body, sent her heart racing like a Mustang breaking free. By the third day, she caught herself laughing at little things. When he stumbled over English words, she teased him with a playful grin. "Not me do this," she said, shaking her head. "It's I do this." He tried again, slower, and she found herself memorizing him, the strong line of his jaw shifting as he spoke, the way his dark eyes locked onto hers with total focus. For the first time in her life, Sable felt a thrill that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with curiosity, and something fiercer she wasn't ready to name. They rode out together across the canyon floor. He settled her carefully behind him on the horse, one strong arm steady around her waist. Each time she leaned into him for balance, her breath caught hard in her throat. She could feel the coiled power of his body beneath her hands, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them both, and the raw, breathtaking wildness of the land stretching out forever. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the cliffs and long shadows draped the camp, they sat side by side near the fire. Flames snapped between them, the only sound. Riven tore off a piece of roasted venison and held it out. She took it. Their fingers brushed, just for a second. The touch was brief, but it left her skin alive, tingling. "Why?" she asked softly, almost scared of his answer. "Why are you helping me?" His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "You not belong to anyone who takes," he said. "You belong where free. I protect." The words were plain, but they struck deep. Sable realized she'd never met a man who saw her as a person. Not a prize, not a pawn, not a bargaining chip. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Quiet, but permanent. By nightfall, wrapped in her blankets, her mind refused to rest. Every lesson, every accidental touch, every shared glance felt like a current she couldn't fight. With a mix of exhilaration and dread, she understood. The Apache warrior had already begun to claim her heart. And when the storm finally broke, the war, the choices, the bloodshed, it would test not only her courage, but the fragile, unbreakable bond growing between them. Dawn came sharp and cool, carrying the bite of dust and pine down from the cliffs. Sable stirred under her blankets, the weight of the last few days pressing heavy on her chest like river rock. She'd grown used to the camp's steady rhythm, the quiet discipline, the purposeful steps, the deep sense of belonging she'd never felt anywhere else. But today, a shadow hung over that fragile peace. Riven returned from the high ridges, his face drawn tight. "Serious. They come," he said simply, words deliberate in his rough English. No panic, just warning. Sable's stomach knotted. She knew exactly who he meant. Colonel Draven Locke. Within hours, scouts slipped back with word. The fort's cavalry was closing in. Distant dust clouds rose like war smoke on the horizon. Warriors moved fast, checking bows, fletching arrows, testing spear points. Even the women and children prepared, with calm, practiced efficiency, generations of survival etched into every motion. Sable watched the camp come alive with purpose, her heart pounding. "Riven," she whispered, voice trembling. "Will they hurt you? Will they hurt the others?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the canyon walls, eyes narrowing to slits. Then he spoke, low and measured. "They take everything. Not just you. Land, people, life. Must stop." Sable felt the full weight of it crash over her. The man who'd carried her away wasn't only guarding her. He was fighting for an entire existence. A world she'd only glimpsed in these few days, yet already loved fiercely. Fear tangled with admiration, and her heart moved in ways she'd never known possible. By midday, the cavalry crested the ridge. Colonel Locke rode at the front, uniform flashing bright in the sun, polished, proud, utterly out of place against the warm earth tones of the camp. A lone rider peeled off, galloped forward, and handed Riven a folded paper. Sable watched as Riven opened it. His face stayed stone, but his jaw tightened just enough to notice. He read the words aloud, slow and clear. "Return the girl immediately, or I will burn your camp and take what is mine by force. No mercy will be given. Colonel Draven Locke." Silence dropped over the camp like a blanket. Even the wind seemed to pause. Riven's dark gaze swept across the waiting warriors, assessing, calculating. Then he turned to Sable, and for the first time she saw the full burden he carried, not just for her, but for every soul in the canyon. "War," he said quietly. "You not go back. I protect. Must fight." Sable's chest squeezed tight. She'd once dreamed of rescue, but this wasn't rescue. This was defiance. Resistance. A raw test of courage she hadn't known she had. And in that heartbeat she understood. Her decision wasn't just about her anymore. It mattered to the man who had gambled everything to hand her back her freedom. "I won't go back," Sable said, voice steady even as her hands trembled. "Not to him. Not to any man who thinks I'm something to own. I belong here, with you, or nowhere." Riven's eyes darkened, a quiet fire flaring in their depths as they held hers. For a long stretch of time, they simply stood there, two souls tied by a thin, fierce thread of trust and something deeper that neither could deny. Then, sharp and sudden, he turned to his warriors. "Prepare," he commanded. "Stand strong, protect the home, protect the people, protect her." The air snapped with electricity, like the moment before thunder cracks the sky. Arrows would soon sing. Steel would clash. The canyon itself would tremble under the weight of pride and raw defiance. Sable balled her fists, a fierce certainty rising hot inside her. This wasn't only about staying alive. It was about love, honor, and a choice she would never give up. Deep in her chest, she knew. No matter what came next, she would stand beside the strongest Apache warrior, ready to meet the storm together. The camp buzzed with urgent purpose. Beneath the outward rhythm of war preparations, a quieter tempest churned inside Sable's heart. The sun threw long shadows over the red dirt, catching the dust and sweat on the warriors. As they readied for the fight they all knew was coming. Against Colonel Locke's blue-coated cavalry. Through every moment, her thoughts circled back to Riven. From the chaos of the ambush, through days of quiet lessons and shared laughter, he had pulled her heart toward him in ways she couldn't fight and didn't want to. It started as curiosity. It grew into trust. Now it threatened to swallow her whole. She had been promised to a colonel she felt nothing for, tied to a future of duty and iron control. But here, among these towering cliffs, glowing fires, and people who looked to Riven as leader, protector, warrior, she had tasted something brand new. Freedom. That freedom came with a heavy price, choice, and she knew she had to claim it. If she wanted to live honestly, she could never return to the life forced on her. She could never go back to a man who saw her as a thing to possess, a piece moved on someone else's board. She belonged only where her heart beat strongest, where she felt safe, truly seen and fully alive. "Riven," she called softly, finding him among the men as he checked the line of sentries along the ridge. He turned. His dark eyes locked on hers with that same piercing intensity she'd first felt in the ambush. He read her without a word. "I won't go back," she said, voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Not to him. Not to anyone who thinks I'm theirs. I choose you." For a long moment, Riven said nothing. The wind carried the faint, ominous drum of distant hooves. The air shimmered thick with tension and waiting. He studied her, canyon shadows carving the sharp angles of his face, deepening the mystery of his eyes. Then the corner of his mouth lifted, just a hint of a smile, almost invisible. "You stay," he said, English careful and deliberate. "Not taken. Not forced. You choose. I honor." Sable's heart soared. Something inside her unlocked. This wasn't just survival. It wasn't only safety. It was respect, recognition, love, though neither had spoken the word yet. For the first time, she felt the wild, terrifying thrill of being truly seen. Riven wasn't here to cage her. He offered strength, protection, and the rare gift of letting her decide her own path. In that freedom, her soul finally drew a full breath. The canyon, once a place of dread and shadows, now felt like home. Every broken cliff, every ridge dusted red, every soft breath of wind carried the promise of a life she could shape herself. She knew the battle with Locke was coming. Unstoppable. But whatever happened, she would face it not as a captive, not as a victim, but as a woman who had chosen where her heart lived. Riven stepped closer. The space between them hummed, charged, respectful. His hand hovered near hers, a quiet invitation. She didn't pull away. Their fingers brushed. A spark leaped in the dying light of the sun. "You are mine only by choice," he said softly, each word heavy with meaning. "And I am yours," Sable answered, "by choice." The words fell clear and certain between them, as the sun slipped behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in fire and gold. Sable felt the world shift forever. As the sun sank lower, bathing the camp in a rich, molten gold, Sable felt the truth settle deep in her bones. Her life had changed forever. The man who had pulled her from danger, shielded her from harm, and shown her a kind of honor and strength she'd never known. He had claimed her heart completely. For the first time, she truly understood what love could be. Unbound, freely chosen, fierce, and forever. Morning arrived heavy with dust and raw anticipation. From her vantage highs on the ridge overlooking the canyon, Sable could make out the sharp flash of steel and the steady rise and fall of mounted troopers, Colonel Draven Locke's cavalry, pushing forward toward the Apache camp with grim determination. Every man, woman, and child in the village moved with sharp, practiced urgency. Beneath their calm surface, fear pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. Riven stood at the forefront, dark eyes sweeping the horizon, reading every shift, every threat, commanding without raising his voice. His warriors looked to him not just for tactics, but for the quiet certainty that he would guide them through whatever hell came next. Sable's heart hammered against her ribs, not only from dread, but from the fierce knowledge that she had chosen to stand beside this man against impossible odds, against the entire world she once belonged to. The first clash erupted without warning. Arrows sliced the air with deadly song, finding their marks with ruthless accuracy. Riven moved like a bolt of lightning, bow drawn and released in one fluid motion, arrow after arrow cutting down riders. Men tumbled from saddles, kicking up clouds of red dust on the canyon floor. His warriors surged forward in perfect, disciplined fury. From the ridge, Sable watched, torn between awe and raw terror. The warrior who held her heart had become a controlled tempest, directing his people, guarding the weak, yet always aware of where she stood. A sharp stab of fear pierced her. What if he fell? But that fear was woven tight with the admiration and love that had taken root in her. Then the real challenge came. Colonel Locke spurred his horse ahead of his line, sword raised high, shouting orders with cold fury. His purpose was plain: cut down Riven and seize back what he believed was his by right. The two men collided at the heart of the fight, a brutal meeting of wills and raw power. Riven's bow dropped. In a single smooth motion, he drew a heavy spear, twirling it with lethal grace. Every strike, every dodge, every counter flowed like water, trained, instinctive, unstoppable. Sable held her breath as the duel unfolded. He parried, thrust, evaded, and struck again, each movement precise and devastating. Yet even in the chaos of battle, she caught glimpses of the man she loved. His gaze flicking for danger, his every action tempered by the need to survive and to protect. Dust and arrows choked the air, but Riven never faltered. At last, through sheer skill, cunning, and brute strength, he drove Locke back, disarming him, breaking his pride in front of his own men. The colonel staggered, humiliated. The remaining troopers wavered. Some dropped weapons and raised hands in surrender. Others turned and fled into the twisting maze of the canyon. The Apache camp held firm. Victory belonged to those who had fought for their homes, their way of life, and the woman who had chosen to stand with them. When the fighting ended, the camp exhaled into a tense, hard-won relief. That night the fires burned higher, warriors tending the wounded, quietly celebrating survival, honoring the brave. Sable walked toward Riven, heart still pounding from the day's fear and exhilaration. He turned, tall, dark, imposing. Yet the look he gave her was soft, reserved only for her. "You alive?" she said, voice shaking with feeling. "You alive," he answered, the simple words carrying a world of weight. "Because you stay." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. Battlefield dust still coated them both, but in that touch there was no grime, no danger, only the bond they had built through terror, trust, and choice. "You protected more than me," she whispered. "You protected everyone. Your home, your people, and me." Riven's eyes softened, the fierce warrior's mask slipping for just a moment. "Because worth fight for," he said quietly. In that hush, amid the settling red dust and fading sunlight, Sable understood something profound. The victory hadn't been won by muscle alone. It had been won by heart, by courage, by the man she loved. For the first time, she felt the full rush and weight of the life she had claimed for herself, and the man who would always stand at her side. The dust of battle finally settled. The canyon grew quiet except for the gentle crackle of fires and the low murmur of caring hands. The Apache camp, weary but unbroken, hummed with a deep sense of triumph. Not just for surviving the day, but for defending the land, the life, and the freedom they held sacred. Sable stood at the ridge's edge, gazing out at the endless red earth that now felt like a promise, and felt a flood of awe, relief, and something even deeper: belonging. Riven emerged from the camp, his dark outline framed by the sunset's golden fire. His steps were deliberate, calm, yet full of power, each one a reminder of the man who had captured her heart and guarded everyone she had come to cherish. Sable's pulse quickened as he drew near. The space between them felt thick with everything they hadn't yet said. "You safe?" he said simply, voice low and steady, carrying pride and quiet relief. "I am," she answered, meeting his gaze. She felt the force behind his eyes, the strength there, and beneath it all, a tenderness she had never known. "Because of you, Riven. You protected us. And me." He studied her in silence, then reached out, covering her hand with his large, calloused one. The touch was solid assurance, a promise sealed through every trial they had faced together. Riven's large, calloused hand closed over hers, the touch solid and sure, a quiet vow forged through every hardship they'd faced together. "Because worth fight for," he said, his English rough and plain, yet carrying a depth that felt ancient, timeless. Sable's heart swelled until it ached. In this rugged place, surrounded by towering red cliffs, endless sky, and the people who had opened their lives to her, she had finally found what she'd always been searching for: true freedom. Not just freedom from the heavy chains of duty and other people's expectations, but freedom from the fear, the doubt, and the past that had never truly been hers. "Then I stay," she whispered, the words heavy with everything she'd fought to claim: her defiance, her choice, her love. "Not because I have to, because I want to, with you." A faint, rare smile touched Riven's lips, the first crack of real warmth breaking through the hard, stoic mask he'd worn for so long. He dipped his head slightly, his fingers brushing hers in a gentle sweep. "Then yours by choice," he answered. Around them, the camp seemed to breathe again. Warriors, elders, and children moved through their evening tasks with a new calm, a quiet peace settling over the fires and teepees. Colonel Locke's threat had been turned back, but something far greater had taken root. A new beginning. One built not on fear, control, or forced promises, but on freedom, trust, and love. Sable stepped closer. The heat of Riven's body wrapped around her like a blanket against the cooling air. The canyon wind rose, carrying the sharp scent of wood smoke, sun-baked earth, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers clinging to the cliffs. She leaned forward and rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. In all the chaos, the terror, the battles, they had found each other. He saw her not as a thing to own, not as a piece in someone else's game, but as a woman, a partner, a person in her own right. Riven's arm slid around her shoulders, strong, protective, yet impossibly gentle. "Free," he murmured, almost to himself, his gaze sweeping the hard-won land they had defended together. "Always free." "Yes," Sable whispered, lifting her eyes to meet his. "Free. Here with you." As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, brushing the sky with streaks of gold and deep crimson, Sable and Riven stood side by side, two dark silhouettes against the vast, silent canyon. Their hearts beat together, slow and sure, bound not by duty or chains, but by choice. By the fierce, unbreakable force of love that had taken root in the red earth, grown strong through dust and danger and fire. And in that moment, the world felt right. A life reclaimed. A love claimed. A new beginning carved out in the wild heart of the Red Land. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal / disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.